Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Bit weird to be starting this in a car. I've been avoiding some books on my TBR for way too long and it's about time we tackled that TBR, you know. My March TBR video has helped me a lot in this because it made me actually pick some books I've definitely been putting off for a very long time, that now's the opportunity to get them read. So spring has sprung. It is a stunning day. I'm actually about to head out and read out in the wilderness in the sunshine with a coffee. It just is the perfect Monday morning recipe. And the first book we're going to be tackling in this video is Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands by Heather Fawcett. I'm already about a quarter of the way through this. I'm having such a better time than I did with the former book, Encyclopedia of Fairies. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the characters are a bit more established and we understand them a bit more. Obviously Emily is neurodivergent girly. Bamblebee is just Bamblebee. I freaking love him. He's such a vibe. It's still low stakes, and that's the beauty of this series, is that it's a low stakes fantasy whimsical series. But because we have unlocked some secrets from the first book, it makes it a bit more intriguing going into this, sort of knowing where the story is going to go. I like cozy fantasy, but I found the first book very mundane, so maybe I do need a little bit of a plot to spice things up a bit. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this, and I'm going to go and read this out in the sunshine for a bit on my own, taking myself out for a little Monday morning day. Let's enjoy this lovely morning.
If you ever see me using the mic when I'm just chilling at home, you just know it's because Ben is always being a noisy boy. But I feel like this reading vlog is already off to a terrible start because I am so far through this book, and have I even really updated you? I fear I haven't. Let's just chat quickly about where we're at, what's kind of going on, and my thought process so far. So I'm currently on page 218. I think just over 100 pages left. And oh my god, I'm having such a better time than I was compared to the first book, which is brilliant news because I was really worried that I wasn't going to enjoy this one. In theory, I actually think I could go back and reread Encyclopedia of Fairies and actually enjoy it more, having known now what to expect from kind of the writing style and the plot and the characters, etc. This is a really fun, cozy time. I would say, like, it is cozy fantasy and it is low stakes, but there's enough happening in this plot for it to still be really gripping. It's low stakes, like it's not like your high stakes world building fantasy, but there are still perilous things going on in this story that keeps you entertained and intrigued and kind of second guessing kind of where the plot's going to go. I'm loving Emily Wilde as a character, as a neurodivergent girly, and I'm loving Bamblebee. I love the characters so much. Them two together in particular are just iconic. The bluntness from Emily, she's just so matter of fact and academic and to the point. And then Bamblebee is just so dramatic and arrogant and funny. And it is just like the most unlikely pair, but it works so well. And I love reading their interactions. I feel we haven't got a massive amount of it in this book, but the crumbs that we have got have just been immaculate. I love them too so much individually, but really together they're just the perfect pair. I'm also loving where the plot's going because I think I've touched on this briefly, but the small sort of elements of the lore that we uncovered from the first book are kind of continuing in this book. And for me, I suppose maybe that's a bit more entertaining and why I'm enjoying it more, because we're kind of getting more into the thick of it. So it doesn't feel as mundane. It doesn't feel as textbook as I feel like the first one felt, because it does go into quite a bit of detail in regards to the lore and the fairies, their environments, and just the history of all of the different places in general. It's kind of like cited, so there'll be asterisks next to certain nouns like place names or people names or phrases, and at the bottom of the page will be like a bibliography type thing where it says, kind of explains why said thing was cited, gives you some background into it. I think that's another thing that made it difficult for me to gel with the first book, because info dumping isn't the word, but I just wasn't expecting that kind of writing style. So I'll repeat myself. This one I think I'm enjoying more because I knew that that was what I was going to get going into it, and I kind of appreciate it now. When you can fully picture in your head Emily Wilde sitting and just writing these journal entries each day after the events have happened, like, it just paints such a vivid picture in my head, and I love it. I love just imagining her sitting by the fire writing out one evening all of the things that have happened in her day. It's very cozy and it's mundane in that sense, but it's not boring, and it's really just enchanting and charming. I don't think there's much of a spoiler, but essentially, similar to the first book, Emily Wilde is trying to complete a map of the Otherlands. We discover something quite important in the first book about one of our characters, so we're kind of following on from that in this book, trying to get more answers behind it and discover some things about our characters and where they come from and this kind of stuff. I'm really enjoying that plot line. I'm liking the development of that. I think I want to try and read a bit more this evening if I can. It is getting quite late now, so I'm not sure how far we will get. But yeah, I wish I was reading this a lot of the times when I'm not, which is a great sign.
Pretty big thing has just happened in our plot, so we're kind of like on the come down from that, and I just read a really cute chapter which, as I've said before, is kind of written in like a journal way. So it's basically like you're reading Emily's journal as she's going on these adventures, and the last chapter I just read was from Bumblebee's POV, like as if he'd taken her journal and written an entry for her to read back because she was sleeping. And like, why do I love that? I love Bumblebee so much. I really hope we get even more of him. Well, we will get even more of him in the third book, I'm sure, but he's just iconic. I love him. Days now, and I finished reading Map of the Otherlands, and I really enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. Definitely more than the first book. The fact that I knew what I was getting into after following on from the first book just helped. Like, it helped massively. So I feel like my expectations were at the right place, and then therefore I enjoyed the book more, which is great. And I kind of want to reread the first book now to see if my opinions have changed. I feel like the pacing is just so perfect for a cozy fantasy. This one felt a bit better set up for me because there were still a couple of storylines we were continuing on from the first book, so we had like something to kind of follow with, which we were. And I think that really helped with the trajectory of the story and to keep me kind of entertained still, because, you know, it didn't feel like we were wandering aimlessly around, which again is kind of the vibe for a cozy fantasy. It's not meant to be high stakes, it's not meant to be a lot going on. It is typically slice of life, character driven, but having a couple of those storylines from the first book for me did make it a bit easier to enjoy. Also low-key obsessed with one of the storylines. Obviously I can't tell you, it would be a big spoiler. It just changes the whole dynamic of our characters, which I love. Which brings me onto Bumblebee as a character. I love him. I actually think he's got to be up there with one of my favourite ever book characters, which is wild because I feel like this book isn't known for having like the best characters, but I think they are written so well and I love what each of them bring to the table. You've obviously got Emily Wilde, our main character, who's neurodivergent coded. She's socially awkward. She's so academic and like driven by her work and her passions in life, and it's very tunnel vision really when it comes to her work, but I love how blunt she is and how committed she is to her life's work and, you know, what she's out here exploring to do. And I think that's so almost empowering, and I reckon it must be so comforting to a lot of people to read a character with those traits. She's so unyielding and I really admire her. But then you've also got Bumblebee, who is like the polar opposite to Emily. He is dramatic, he is arrogant, he's lazy, but he's just so charming. Them two together watching them interact is just gold. It's funny because I read this book and the romance that we get between Emily and Bumblebee is like it's like crumbs. Like we literally get crumbs of it. It's not in our faces at all. We barely really got any time with just them two in more of an intimate way. So I could have had like so much more of it in this book, but why do I also feel like the amount we were given was just so perfect to just keep you like pining for them two? It's just so perfectly done. And yeah, them two as a pair and as individuals, to be fair, I'm obsessed with. Like whenever Bumblebee interacts with Emily and like some of the sweet things he say to her, they just warm my heart. He knows her so well. You can tell that she does kind of hold back and she struggles to show her affections towards Bumblebee, but like he just knows, and he knows how to talk to her. He understands how she's feeling without her even having to tell him. And there was that one chapter where he was writing in her journal, so it was all from his perspective. He was writing it knowing that Emily would then obviously wake up the next morning and read the passage that he's written, and the way he like writes it almost to her, it's so lovely. So I'm 100% ready to dive into the third book. I think it's the Compendium of Lost Tales, if I've remembered that correctly, and it's come out recently, so I'll 100% be getting my hands on that ASAP and finishing off the little trilogy. So far we're doing well. Books I've been avoiding, I've proved to myself that we don't need to avoid them. And that does actually bring me on to the next book, which I have started. I'm getting really terrible at starting books and not filming me starting them. But that is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I've been putting this book off for about 2 years. It's crazy. I've been saying for years and years and years and years that I really want to get into Greek mythology. I find all kinds of mythology really interesting when I get a taste of it. It's like Greek mythology, Norse mythology, saints and gods. I think it's fascinating, and I suppose that's not too crazy coming from a fantasy girly. I've been wanting to read this book for so long. It's been on my shelves for so long. I just saw it in the works one day randomly on a whim. I think it might have been like discounted, and I was like, do you know what, I'm gonna pick it up because it also just looks so gorgeous. But I've just been putting it off because I was scared that it would be boring. I was scared that it would still be too complicated and hard to digest and understand. So I've been really putting it off and avoiding it. But I picked it recently for my March TBR and I said, look, we're reading it. It's on the TBR list. This is my one shot to actually get this book read. And so far I am 50 odd pages in and I am impressed. And I knew as soon as I finished reading the prologue, which was literally like 2 or 3 pages, I just knew then that actually I should not have put this book off. And I didn't know what this book was about before I filmed my TBR video. I didn't even really look at the back. I just knew it was Greek mythology. I knew Jennifer Saint had written a lot of Greek mythology, so I just thought I'm going to buy it. No idea what story it's following, what gods, what characters it's following. It revolves around the Minotaur. I feel like most people, regardless of their Greek mythology knowledge, know of the Minotaur. We're following his sister. The Minotaur was a product of a deal that his dad, Minos or Minos, I'm not sure, I've been saying Minos, so yeah, I'm probably going to pronounce names wrong, please bear with me. The Minotaur is the son of Minos, who made a deal with Poseidon, the god of like the ocean, many moons ago, and basically tricked him with this deal and tried to take more than he was giving, essentially, in a nutshell. Obviously Poseidon is furious about this and he punishes Minos by cursing his wife to have an odd obsession with bulls. And you know how babies are made. She ends up having a baby with a bull, okay? Or like a beast, you know, something like that. Thus the Minotaur is born. So she's already got other children at this point, Ariadne being one of them, and the Minotaur obviously grows up to be this horrible, horrible beast. Ariadne's older brother is away from home a lot. He's an amazing athlete. He competes in all the different games, wins awards, medals, all sorts of things like that. But he dies in a freak accident involving a bull. Ironic, right? And at the fury that Minos has towards this, he then forces every year 14 children from Athens, where the elder brother died, to come to Crete and be sacrificed to the Minotaur as kind of like a punishment for allowing his eldest son to die. We're basically following a story where Ariadne falls in love with this sacrifice, and he's literally got like, what, a day or two to live before he's given to be food for the Minotaur, and Ariadne is going to do everything in her power to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's like a forbidden love. It's really high stakes. I think, yeah, it's going to be a really heartfelt story, but also already from what I've read from Ariadne's perspective, she's so strong-willed. She isn't of the same mind as her dad. You know, her dad is so power hungry. She's disgusted by the way that he acts and behaves. It's really sad already being in her perspective of how she's forced to kind of witness all of this horror that's happening in her kingdom that she's not responsible for, but like she is the child of the man who's doing this to people, innocent people. It's still really easy to understand. It just feels like I'm reading any regular, like maybe fantasy book or something like that. I feel really silly for avoiding this because I thought it would be hard to read because it's could not be further from. Other than trying to pronounce some of these Greek names, it's so easy to read. And so far it's also definitely not boring. From literally the get-go, the very first page, I was taking in every single word. I'm just completely locked in, taking in everything that I'm reading, and I'm just so fascinated by it all. So even though I know what happens, I'm still really interested to see where the story goes from here. Just an example of how gorgeous I think Jennifer Saint writes. We're currently talking about Theseus, the Prince of Athens. We're learning about his upbringing, and literally it says, "As I studied him, and believe me, I drank him in like a parched animal at a riverbank, I began to see the cold, steady certainty of the chill green depths. Not a dolphin leaping through the roiling waves, glittering in the sunlight, but rather a shark gliding through the murky quiet, focused, powerful, and inexorable." It's so poetic. Like the way she describes things is beautiful. I fear I look a little bit dishevelled. I'm post-work, I'm also post-gym, scrambling to get dinner ready because I'm in a cooking slump at the moment. Does anyone else have like cooking slumps where you just can't be asked to cook like ever? I haven't updated you guys for a while. I'm about 100 pages away from finishing, and since I last spoke to you, my opinions have kind of changed. I don't know, I'm not enjoying it as much as I was, because when it started, I was just like, I was really into it, and I was like, this is going to be really good, and I had really high hopes for it. What I thought was going to be the storyline for the whole book lasted for like 100 pages, which really took me off guard, and I was like, oh, okay, that's fine, let's see where we go from here. Just kind of been very slowly somewhere, but I must admit it's been a little bit bland. It's kind of the action, there was a bit of action going on and like high stakes and stress, but that happened all in the first 100 pages, and then I don't know, I've just been kind of laying low for quite a long time, and I've been waiting for like a big climax to happen, and I feel like, is that a me problem because this is a retelling, so I'm assuming it's basing it off of the real legend of like Ariadne and the Minotaur, blah blah. So I'm like, well, if that is what the actual story is, then I can't hate on it. You can only retell a story, I guess, in a certain way, but I don't know, it's just got a bit dull for me and very, very slow. So that's a shame. The writing's still amazing and I'm still learning a lot, and I, for the most part, like I say, it's dull, but I'm still really absorbing the words on the paper. I'm not switching off much. I'm genuinely really taking it in, but it's got a little bit boring. I love Ariadne. I think she is a really strong, good character. I also love her sister, Phaedra. Part of the story we're kind of following the sisters kind of separately, and they both get different POVs for each chapter, which I'm really enjoying because at the beginning it was just Ariadne, now we're getting Ariadne and her sister Phaedra, and I like that dynamic. And also, yeah, Phaedra is like, she's a sassy queen. I love her, and she's very intelligent, and I love an intelligent woman, and I love it when they don't make it obvious. Like, it's giving Silent Assassin. Like, she's taking things in. She's not acting on it, but she's like, don't underestimate me because the time will come when I will have you on your ass. And I love that. Plan for this evening, to be honest, is to just race to the end. I'm going to listen to the audiobook. I've got to finish cooking dinner. I need to do hair wash, so hair dryer is going on. I honestly might just plug in the earphones and try and bash out the rest of this book. 100 pages. I'm hoping like 2 hours time I can have this book finished. I've had a few days to process the ending of Ariadne and just the story in general, to be fair, and this actually blew me away, and I ended up giving it 4 stars in the end because I fell in love with this way more than I thought I would. There's a common theme in this video, I feel like. I think at the heart of it, this is just such an important book. Like, it's such an important story. Obviously, a lot of the themes are very ancient and kind of like old worldly, but they're still very significant in today's day and age, especially in like the position that women are put in and the things that they have to face, stereotypes and the molds that they kind of have to put themselves in. My heart was just constantly breaking for the main characters in this book. We follow Ariadne and then Phaedra, I learned is her name, not Phaedra, oops, later on in the book. And my heart broke for both of them. Their stories are so tragic in such different ways, and it was just horrible in a way to read, but then also addicting. Like, I couldn't put this book down and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was absorbing every word I read on the page. Like, I was so impressed with how focused I was throughout the reading experience. And then I suppose that's also a compliment to the way it's written, the writing style that Jennifer Saint uses. It made it so digestible. Like, it wasn't clunky, it wasn't confusing, it was clear, it was concise, it was easy to read, and at no point did I feel confused or like weighing over my head, you know. It all made sense, and I was able to really feel for these characters, follow the story, understand what was happening. I learned so much from this book in terms of like life lessons, but also in terms of just like Greek mythology and names and gods and their purposes, who knows who's got beef with who. And ultimately that's part and parcel why I wanted to read it, is to understand more about Greek mythology. And this particular author, I think, has 3 other books within the kind of Greek mythology realms, but then I'd also now like to go and read some Madeline Miller, as I know she's also renowned for her Greek mythology retellings. I just can't believe how much I enjoyed this. I was really stunned by it. I thought it was going to be maybe like a 3-star read. I finished this a few days now that I'm filming this, and I've been thinking about it every single day. Obviously, I think I mentioned the one part that fell off for me was just the pacing in the middle got quite slow. I think compared to such a high action start and a very high impact end, it just kind of dipped a bit too much. I understand that there's going to be ebbs and flows of stories, but I don't know, for a while there it was really quite challenging to get through, only in the sense of we just felt very flatlined. But I'd really recommend this if you're looking for a Greek mythology retelling, if you want to get into it, if you're just interested to know about the story of Ariadne. I did do some Googling afterwards just to see some comparisons, as I know this isn't like 1000% canon, but then obviously it's mythology, so it's all somewhat of a legend. I had way more fun with this than I thought. My camera is about to die, so I'm just going to switch quickly, bear with me. Sorry for the quality shift, we've just had to move over to the phone just for now. I'm going to go on to the final book of this video, which is a book that, if you saw my recent TBR video, you will know has been on my TBR for I think about 11 years. And it's actually the very first book that I ever added to my Goodreads TBR list. And that is Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. I've been putting this off for literally over a decade, and I honestly don't know why. I think it's just one of those cases of it's always sounded very intriguing and interesting to me, but there was always just other books that I wanted to read more at the time, and then as time's gone on, it's at the very bottom of my list. I just forget it exists. It's time to finally read it and see what my thoughts and opinions are. It's about a universe where once you turn 16, you have to undergo a surgical cosmetic, I guess, procedure that turns you from an ugly into a pretty, and then you can go and live your life, your adult life, as a pretty, and it seems to be like the perfect way to be and live. But it soon becomes apparent to our main character that actually it's not all that it seems on the other side of this, and there's a lot more sinister than it might seem on the surface. So our main character is doing everything in her power to actually avoid getting the pretty surgery and is trying to remain ugly. So I'm assuming there's going to be a bit of action in this, there's going to be some high stakes, politics, which I haven't read much sci-fi in my time. I don't know if it's a sci-fi or dystopian. I assume it's actually more dystopian. And the dystopian books I've read in the past, I've really enjoyed. I'm gonna start this tonight. I'm gonna try so hard to like binge and get through this book, because I've been reading a lot of books recently that I've been wanting to avoid, and I'm kind of itching now to get back into my usual mood reading schedule, which I'm gonna really try hard not to let that affect my opinions on this book. So like a third of the way through this now and I don't feel too great about it. I have considered DNFing this now already. I think I want to give it like another few chapters and see where I stand, because sometimes I'm really not really enjoying it, but sometimes I'm like entertained, and then other times I'm just so bored, like it's just not going into my head. I think the audiobook is definitely worse. I've been trying to listen to the audiobook while I've just been like doing bits and bobs around the house or jobs that I need to get done. That's when I'm not enjoying it, and that's when I'm really not taking in anything of what's being said to me. So when I'm reading it on my Kindle, I would say I'm a bit more invested. However, I still don't think it's that gripping to me. I think one of the big problems is I feel like there's zero description really of anything whatsoever, and it's really hard for me to read and having no idea of what things look like. There's no description of like the setting and really how our characters really look, and it makes it really hard for me to then imagine it and immerse myself in it, especially when you're reading like a sci-fi or a dystopian or like a fantasy, for example. It's having those vivid descriptions for me really helps with the reading experience, because I can like fully plant myself in this world, whereas I feel like I don't really know where we are, I don't know what our surroundings look like, I don't know what our characters look like, and that's just really jarring for me. Also, we're like a third in and we've literally met pretty much only 3 characters, mainly 2 to be honest, which again, it just feels very isolated. Like, I don't know if that's the purpose of this book, because our main character is an ugly in a world where there's so many pretties and she wants to be a pretty, but because she's not quite there yet, she feels quite isolated. Am I thinking too deeply into that, or is that the intent? I don't know. I'm on part 2 now, so the story's taking a shift, and hopefully we're going to get into the thick of some things shortly, make some discoveries, things maybe will get interesting. If they don't, I might just have to DNF this. One of the things about this book that is so jarring is that it spends so long on like travel and action. Like, hoverboards are a big thing, and it's one of the things that Tally, the main character, and her friend Shay bond over. Now Tally's trying to find Shay as she's run off to avoid her pretty operation, and there's just so many consecutive chapters of Tally just going to find her in this, like, I'm reading it as like a derelict land. I don't actually know, because like I said, I feel like there's no description, but in my head I'm just imagining like deserts and canyons and just like complete desolate land, and then her just hoverboarding over dunes and God knows what to try and find her friend. But it's so boring to read about. Like, I'm not taking any of this in, but it's just pages upon pages her trying to survive in these lands while she looks for her friend. Like, we're almost halfway through this book. It's not looking good, is it? I feel like this is a seat of shame. So after trying, like really trying, we've DNF'd Uglies. I couldn't get through it, and I just kind of sat there and I was like, there are so many books on my TBR that I want to read that trump this like 1000%. I'm not wasting any more time on it. So Uglies has actually been my first DNF of the year, and I feel kind of great about it. I feel like I'm glad that I explored the curiosity that I had for literally over a decade, but it just wasn't at all what I kind of thought it was going to be. I feel like the premise is the strongest part of this book, like this whole concept of the uglies and the pretties and that kind of segregation and this really grotesque way that their government and world works. But 40% into this book, and I feel like we'd barely touched the surface on that and barely explored it. Yes, it's a 4-book series. I'm sure, you know, if I was to carry on the books, we would get into that. But I feel like when you're starting off a brand new series of a concept that strong, like you've got to keep it enticing, and you've got to kind of focus on that, otherwise like the reader feels a bit misled. And I did feel misled because we just weren't really honing in on that whatsoever, which is ultimately why I wanted to pick up the book in the first place. There's just no focus on the characters and their backstory, which made it then very hard to connect to anything, because we're not focusing on the plot really, we're not focusing on like the USP, if you will, of the plot, but we're also not focusing in on the characters. I don't really know anything about our main character Tally other than she's a brainwashed moron. Oh, I didn't like her. I feel like her and her friend Shay had so many conversations at the beginning of this book where Shay was very much black and white and obvious about how she didn't agree with the operation and how obviously she ends up kind of running away, and yet Tally's just all she cares about is being pretty, and like she doesn't take any of what Shay said to her on board, you know, and you're just like, it's so obvious. Tally had like no sense of self, like at all. She didn't really stick up for anything. She's just whining constantly, I want to be pretty, I've waited so long to be pretty, blah blah. Things are starting to slowly be introduced to her that are obviously indicating that there's something quite wrong about the way that this whole system is working, but she's just so blinded by that, but like in the most dumb way ever. Also, she should literally be dead by the point that I got to. I was 40% in when I decided to DNF this book, and all the traveling that we're following her doing on this like hoverboard or whatever, the amount of like tumbles and falls that she takes, and like some of them sound brutal. I'm like, I'm sorry, this girl is literally 15, like she should be dead at this point. Like it did not make any sense, I fear. So after all of those frustrations, I decided it was just time to put the book down, and hey, I tried it. Ultimately, I am just so glad that the oldest ever book that I've had on my TBR is officially done. We're done with it. We tried it. I don't think I'm ever going to pick it up again. I might watch the film out of sheer interest. So we've had two complete opposite ends of the spectrum. We've had two of these books I have been avoiding be 4 stars, which is a fantastic outcome, and one of them was a DNF. So I think it just goes to show, like, it shows both ends of the spectrum, I suppose. Like, you know yourself the best, you know what books you're obviously going to enjoy, and you'll tend to always reach for those same books, that same genre, and that is absolutely fine because the likelihood is you're going to enjoy it. However, sometimes you just got to step out of your comfort zone, and you might actually find a book you love, and it's one of those things where it's like so frustrating that that book was like sat on my shelf readily available to me for so long, and I left it there not knowing the impact it was going to have. I find that so fascinating. I hope you found this video interesting. Please like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you next time with a brand new video. Bye friends.